Welcome back to another sleepover with history. I'm Thomas, and I'll be your guide for tonight's journey into one of the most misunderstood worlds of feudal Japan. So get comfortable, maybe grab a warm drink, and let's dim the lights as we explore a story that's far more complex than you might imagine. Tonight we're stepping behind the silk screens and paper walls of Japan's most exclusive compounds to discover what life was really like for the women who inhabited a world of rigid ceremony, political intrigue, and unimaginable isolation. These weren't just background figures in someone else's story. They were players in a game where survival meant mastering arts you've never heard of, navigating politics deadlier than any battlefield, and finding identity in a system designed to erase it. From the moment they entered those gates, often as children, these women lived by rules so intricate. They make modern etiquette look simple. Every gesture had meaning. Every word could shift the balance of power, and every day was a delicate dance between aspiration and desperation, performed in rooms where the walls literally had ears. So before we begin, take a moment to like the video, and subscribe if you genuinely enjoy these deep dives into history's hidden corners. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. It's always fascinating to see our global community of history lovers gathering for these nighttime journeys. Now settle in, because what you think you know about concubines in feudal Japan is probably wrong. And the truth is far more captivating than any fiction. You're 8 years old, and your parents have just sold you to the most powerful man in the province. But don't worry, they're calling it an honor. Your father adjusts his best kimono. Your mother dabs her eyes with a silk handkerchief, and everyone pretends this is a celebration. Welcome to the concubine selection process, where childhood ends with a contract written in calligraphy. The recruiters didn't just show up randomly. They've been watching your family for months, maybe years. They know your father owes rice taxes he can't pay. They know your mother comes from minor nobility. They know you can already read basic characters and haven't embarrassed yourself at the local shrine festivals. Most importantly, they know you're pretty enough to catch attention, but not so beautiful that you'll immediately threaten the established hierarchy. This isn't a fairy tale rescue. This is strategic human acquisition. The great houses of feudal Japan didn't collect concubines like decorative objects, though they certainly treated them that way. They collected them like investments. Your beauty might fade, but your family connections, your potential to bear heirs, and your ability to serve as a political pawn, those have long-term value. The selection criteria would make modern HR departments weep. Physical appearance, obviously, but not just beauty. Your hands are examined for signs of manual labor. Your teeth are inspected like a horse at market. Your posture is evaluated for natural grace. Can you walk without making noise? Can you sit for hours without fidgeting? Do you have any visible scars, marks, or imperfections that might displease a lord who considers himself divine? Then comes the background check. Not your criminal history. Your age. Your family's political allegiances. Are your relatives loyal to the current regime? Have they ever spoken against the ruling clan? Is there any chance that placing you in the inner compound might create a security risk? Because nothing ruins a romantic evening quite like discovering your concubine's uncle is plotting your assassination. Your education level matters, but not the way you'd think. Too little education, and you're useless for anything beyond the most basic functions. Too much education, and you might develop dangerous ideas about independence or self-determination. The sweet spot is knowing enough to be entertaining, but not enough to be threatening. You should recite poetry beautifully, but never write your own. You should understand political discussions but never offer opinions. But here's the thing nobody tells you during this process. You're not just being selected to be a concubine. You're being selected to potentially become the mother of the next generation of rulers. That adorable 8-year-old giggling nervously in her best silk kimono. She might one day give birth to the most powerful person in the province, or she might spend 40 years arranging flowers and slowly losing her mind. The recruiters are betting on both possibilities. The negotiation between your parents and the recruiting officials is fascinating and horrible to watch. Your father tries to drive up your value by mentioning your musical abilities. Your mother discreetly hints at your remarkable health and strong constitution. The recruiters nod politely while calculating exactly how little they can pay for a girl whose family is desperate enough to sell their daughter for rice money and social climbing opportunities. Money changes hands, but not the way you'd expect. Your family receives immediate financial relief. Those rice taxes get paid. Debts disappear. Suddenly there's enough food for your siblings. In exchange, you become property of the house. Not metaphorically. Literally, you now belong to a political entity that will feed, clothe, educate and use you according to their needs, not yours. The paperwork is extensive and specific. Your new owners want documentation of your health, your family lineage, your education level, and your psychological disposition. Are you prone to melancholy? Do you have violent tendencies? Are you likely to form inappropriate attachments to servants or other concubines? These aren't casual questions. They're evaluating whether you're going to be a profitable long-term investment or a management problem. And then comes the goodbye that isn't really a goodbye, because you'll probably never see your family again. Your parents bow deeply, express their eternal gratitude for the honor bestowed upon their humble household, and watch their daughter disappear into a palanquin headed toward a life they can't even imagine. You're carried away from everything familiar, bundled in silk that's more expensive than anything your family has ever owned, toward a compound where every day for the rest of your life will be governed by rules you haven't learned yet. The last thing you see of your childhood home is your mother's face through the palanquin window. And the last thing you think as a free person is probably something like, "I wonder when I'll come home for a visit." Spoiler alert, you won't. The compound gates close behind you with a sound like finality itself, and suddenly you're in a world that operates by laws of physics you didn't know existed. The building stretches out before you like a small city, all connected corridors, hidden courtyards and rooms within rooms within rooms. You've just entered the most exclusive prison in Japan, where the bars are made of silk and the locks are social expectations. Your first impression might be wonder. The architecture is breathtaking. Carved wooden screens, perfectly manicured gardens visible through every window, corridors so polished you can see your reflection in the floorboards. Everything is beautiful, expensive, and designed to impress. What you don't realize yet is that beauty this perfect requires maintenance, this obsessive, and you're about to become part of that maintenance system. You're immediately handed over to an older woman, whose title translates roughly to supervisor of new acquisitions, but whose actual job is professional dream crusher. She's been in the compound for 30 years. She entered as a fresh-faced teenager, full of hope and romantic fantasies. Now she's a middle-aged woman, whose primary skill is detecting which new girls might cause problems and squashing their spirits before they get dangerous ideas. The orientation process begins immediately, and it's designed to overwhelm you into submission. You're shown to your quarters, if you can call a space smaller than most modern closets' quarters. It contains a sleeping mat, a small chest for personal belongings you don't have, and a window that looks out onto a courtyard you're not allowed to enter without permission. This is your new universe, 8 tatami mats of personal space in a building that houses hundreds of women. Then comes the rules orientation, delivered in a monotone voice by a woman who's clearly given this speech thousands of times. You may not leave the compound without written permission from your supervisor, countersigned by a senior concubine, and approved by the household administrator. You may not send or receive correspondence without it being read and approved by the censorship committee. You may not speak to male servants except in the presence of a chaperone. You may not form exclusive friendships with other concubines. You may not refuse any assignment given by your superiors. The list continues for what feels like hours. You may not sing loudly. You may not run in the corridors. You may not express political opinions. You may not ask questions about the Lord's schedule, his other women, or his family affairs. You may not wear colors that haven't been approved for your rank. You may not eat food that hasn't been assigned to your dietary level. You may not, essentially, do anything that suggests you have personal agency or independent thoughts. But wait, there's more. The hierarchy within the compound is more complex than the imperial court system. You're entering at the bottom, obviously, but there are 17 different levels of concubine status, each with its own privileges, restrictions, clothing allowances, and social protocols. The woman explaining this to you has been stuck at level 6 for 15 years. She's not bitter about it at all, obviously. Your daily schedule is handed to you written in beautiful calligraphy that makes your enslavement look artistic. Wake at dawn for purification rituals. Morning meal in the communal dining area with other women of your rank. Educational sessions until midday. Afternoon meal. Personal cultivation time, translation, practicing skills that might make you more valuable. Evening meal. Preparation for potential summons. Lights out at the designated hour. Every single day. For the rest of your life. The educational sessions sound promising until you learn what they actually involve. You're not being educated to think or question or grow as a person. You're being trained like a very expensive pet. Tea ceremony, but only the specific variations preferred by your lord. Musical instruction, but only on instruments he finds pleasing. Poetry, but only in styles that flatter masculine sensibilities. Flower arrangement, because apparently the ability to make dead plants look aesthetically pleasing is crucial to your value as a human being. And then there are the lessons they don't put in the official schedule. How to walk silently across wooden floors. How to detect poison in food or drink. How to read the mood of powerful men and adjust your behavior accordingly. How to survive in a building full of women who view you as competition for limited resources and even more limited attention. The other concubines watch you with expressions ranging from pity to calculation. Some see a potential ally, someone new who might be useful in their own schemes for advancement. Others see a threat, fresh competition who might disrupt their carefully maintained position in the hierarchy. Most see a reminder of what they used to be, before years in this place taught them that dreams are dangerous and hope is a luxury they can't afford. Your supervisor explains the economic realities with brutal clarity. Every piece of clothing you wear, every grain of rice you eat, every stick of incense burned in your quarters is being charged against your account. Yes, you have an account. You're expected to eventually pay back the investment made in your acquisition, training and maintenance. How, you ask? By advancing in rank, gaining favor, and generating value for the household, or by bearing children who will increase the Lord's political power and secure advantageous marriages. The arithmetic is depressing. At your current rank, you consume more resources than you generate. You're operating at a loss, subsidized by the potential future return on investment. This means every day you fail to advance is a day you're becoming less valuable and more expendable. The pressure is subtle but constant. Prove your worth or risk being sold to a lesser house, or worse, dismissed entirely. As night falls on your first day, you're lying on your thin sleeping mat, staring at the ceiling, trying to process the magnitude of what's happened to your life. 12 hours ago, you were a child with a family, a home, and at least the illusion of freedom. Now your inventory in the most sophisticated people management system ever devised, surrounded by hundreds of other women who are all trapped in the same beautiful, suffocating cage. The building around you settles into evening quiet, but it's not peaceful quiet. It's the sound of hundreds of women who have learned to cry silently, dream carefully, and hope just enough to survive, but not enough to rebel. Welcome to the rest of your life, where every sunrise is a performance evaluation, and every sunset is a reminder that another day has passed without escape. You wake up to the sound of a wooden clapper, not an alarm clock, because those don't exist yet, but a woman whose entire job is to walk the corridors at dawn, making noise, to ensure everyone rises at exactly the same moment. Welcome to your first lesson in the compound hierarchy. Even the most mundane tasks are someone's complete identity. The woman with the clapper is a former concubine who failed to advance beyond rank 3 and has been relegated to administrative duties. She's technically still part of the system, still fed and housed and clothed, but she's also a walking reminder of what happens when you don't successfully navigate the advancement game. Every morning, her job is to wake up women who still have hope while knowing she's lost hers years ago. The ranking system in a major compound makes modern corporate structures look simple. At the bottom you have the new acquisitions, that's you, who exist in a kind of probationary status. You're being evaluated constantly, but you have no real privileges and no political power. You're basically human potential energy, waiting to be converted into something more useful. Above you are the established concubines, ranked from 1 through 12, with each level bringing specific privileges and responsibilities. Rank 1 concubines get slightly better sleeping quarters and marginally improved meal allocations. Rank 12 concubines have private rooms, personal servants, and the right to wear silk in colors other than regulation brown. But here's where it gets interesting. The real power isn't held by the highest ranked concubines. It's held by the women who manage the system itself. The senior administrators, the educational supervisors, the women who control information flow and resource allocation. These are the former concubines who figured out that influence is more valuable than beauty and administrative power lasts longer than youth. Your immediate supervisor explains the advancement mechanics, while you're getting dressed in your regulation undyed cotton kimono. Advancement isn't automatic. It's not based on time served or good behavior. It's based on value generated for the household, measured in ways both obvious and subtle. Did you successfully entertain important visitors? Did your musical performance enhance the Lord's reputation at a political gathering? Did you provide useful information about another concubine's suspicious behavior? Wait, what was that last one? Yes, part of the advancement system is based on intelligence gathering and reporting. Not spying, exactly. That sounds harsh. Think of it as maintaining household security through collaborative information sharing. You're expected to report anything unusual, suspicious, or potentially threatening that you observe about other concubines. Their secret correspondences, their political opinions, their suspicious friendships, their signs of mental instability. This creates an atmosphere where paranoia isn't a psychological disorder, it's a survival strategy. Every conversation might be reported. Every friendship might be an intelligence gathering operation. Every moment of vulnerability might be weaponized against you later. You're not just competing with other concubines for advancement, you're potentially under surveillance by them. The women who thrive in this environment are fascinating psychological case studies. They develop skills in compartmentalization, emotional manipulation, and strategic thinking that would impress modern intelligence agencies. They learn to project warmth while feeling nothing, to offer sympathy while calculating advantage, to build alliances while maintaining the ability to betray them at a moment's notice. But there are also women who refuse to play the game, and they're equally interesting. Some retreat into complete compliance. They follow every rule perfectly, never cause problems, never stand out, and hope that being invisible will keep them safe. Others develop elaborate fantasy lives, spending their days in mental worlds where they have agency, freedom, and meaningful choices. A few become genuinely religious, finding in Buddhist or Shinto practices a sense of purpose that the ranking system can't provide. The most dangerous women in the compound are the ones who figured out how to game the system without losing their souls. They understand that advancement requires playing political games, but they maintain secret alliances, hidden resource networks, and private codes of ethics that allow them to survive with some semblance of integrity intact. These women are watched carefully by the administrators because they represent the possibility that the system isn't as absolute as it appears. Your first week involves careful observation of these dynamics. You sit in communal meals watching women who've perfected the art of polite conversation while conducting subtle warfare. You attend group educational sessions where the real learning happens in peripheral vision and whispered asides. You participate in evening cultural activities where every poem recited and every song performed is both artistic expression and political positioning. The economics of the hierarchy become clearer as you learn to read the subtle signs of status. Better ranked concubines get served their tea first. They receive higher quality writing materials. Their sleeping quarters are closer to heat sources in winter and better ventilated in summer. Most importantly, they get more information about the Lord's schedule, preferences, and mood. Information that can be leveraged for advancement opportunities. But advancement isn't just about individual achievement. The system is designed to create collective responsibility and mutual surveillance. If a concubine from your intake group commits a serious infraction, attempts escape, smuggles forbidden correspondence, expresses dangerous political opinions, the entire group faces consequences. This means you're not just responsible for your own behavior, you're also responsible for monitoring and controlling the behavior of women who entered the compound around the same time. The psychological pressure is carefully calibrated to be motivating without being completely crushing. There's always hope. the woman who advanced 3 ranks in 2 years, the concubine who caught the Lord's attention and now has her own garden courtyard, the success stories that keep everyone believing advancement is possible. But there's also always fear, the women who were transferred to lesser households, who disappeared under mysterious circumstances, who serve as warnings about the consequences of failure. As you lie in your narrow sleeping space at the end of your first week, you're beginning to understand that you haven't just entered a building full of women competing for the attention of one man. You've entered a complex social organism with its own ecosystem, food chain, and evolutionary pressures. Every woman around you is simultaneously a potential ally, competitor, information source, and threat. The hierarchy isn't just about ranking, it's about survival. And the first rule of survival is understanding that in a system designed to pit women against each other, the only way to maintain your humanity is to remember that everyone else is as trapped as you are. Even the woman who advances to rank 12, gets her private room and silk kimono privileges, is still a prisoner. She's just a prisoner with better accommodations and more complex responsibilities. The cage is still a cage, even when it's decorated with beautiful artwork and served with expensive tea. Sweet dreams. 3 months into your new life, and you've learned the most important skill in the compound, how to be simultaneously present and invisible. It's an art form that requires perfect calibration, visible enough to fulfill your duties and avoid punishment, invisible enough to avoid attracting the wrong kind of attention or becoming a target for other women's ambitions. Your daily routine has become a carefully choreographed performance of strategic mediocrity. In tea ceremony class, you demonstrate competence without excellence. Too clumsy, and you'll be marked as unsuitable for advancement. Too skilled, and the rank 6 concubine who's been studying tea ceremony for 8 years might decide you need to experience an unfortunate accident with hot water. The morning starts with ablutions that are part hygiene, part ritual, and entirely about conformity. Every woman in your rank group washes her face with the same soap, combs her hair in the same style, and dresses in identical undyed cotton kimonos. Individuality isn't just discouraged, it's literally impossible. You're being processed into uniformity, transformed from a person with unique characteristics into an interchangeable unit of potential value. Breakfast is served in the communal hall, and the seating arrangement tells the story of the entire compound hierarchy at a glance. New acquisitions sit at low tables near the kitchen entrance. Higher-ranked concubines sit closer to the windows, with better lighting and less foot traffic. The most senior women eat at individual tables with their own personal serving attendants. But the real hierarchy is revealed in the conversation patterns. New women like you are expected to speak only when directly addressed. Mid-level concubines can engage in restricted conversations about approved topics. Senior women discuss compound politics, the Lord's schedule, and administrative decisions. The most telling detail, only women above rank 8 are allowed to express opinions about the food. The educational sessions continue, but now you understand their true purpose. You're not being educated to be a well-rounded person. You're being trained to be a specialized tool for enhancing the Lord's reputation and advancing his political interests. Your music lessons focus exclusively on pieces he's known to enjoy. Your poetry instruction emphasizes themes that flatter his worldview. Your calligraphy practice involves copying texts that support his political positions. The flower arrangement classes are particularly revealing about the compound's real priorities. You're taught to create displays that reflect seasonal appropriateness, political symbolism, and aesthetic harmony. But you're also taught to recognize the meanings embedded in other people's arrangements. A chrysanthemum placed at a specific angle might indicate loyalty. Bamboo arranged in certain patterns could signal resistance. The same skills used to create beautiful decorative displays can also be used for coded communication. This is where things get interesting. The official compound rules forbid unauthorized communication between concubines, but the educational curriculum inadvertently provides multiple systems for covert messaging. Music lessons teach you to recognize subtle variations in rhythm and melody that can convey complex information. Poetry instruction includes training in double meanings and hidden references. Even the tea ceremony involves precise movements that can be modified to signal different messages. You're beginning to realize that the women around you are far more sophisticated than the system gives them credit for. Beneath the surface compliance, there are elaborate networks of information sharing, resource distribution, and mutual aid. The woman who always seems to have extra writing paper isn't just lucky. She's part of a supply chain managed by concubines who've learned to game the resource allocation system. The perfectly timed accidents that befall women who threaten the established order aren't random. They're coordinated responses by groups who've learned to protect their territory. The afternoon involves personal cultivation time, which sounds peaceful, but is actually the most stressful part of the day. This is when you're expected to practice skills that might lead to advancement opportunities, but you're also under the closest surveillance. Other concubines are watching to see what you're focusing on, how quickly you're progressing, and whether you might become a competitive threat. You settle on calligraphy practice, which seems safe. Beautiful handwriting is valued but not threatening. It demonstrates culture and refinement without suggesting dangerous creativity or independent thinking. Plus, the repetitive nature of copying classical texts is oddly soothing after a morning of social navigation and competitive positioning. But even calligraphy practice reveals the compound's underlying tensions. The texts you're copying aren't selected randomly. They're chosen to reinforce proper attitudes about duty, submission, and the importance of serving your superiors without question. You spend hours copying poems about the beauty of self-sacrifice, stories about loyal retainers who died for their lords, and philosophical essays about the virtue of accepting your assigned role in the cosmic order. The messages are subtle but persistent. Questioning authority leads to chaos. Individual desires are less important than collective harmony, and true fulfillment comes from perfectly executing the role you've been assigned rather than pursuing personal ambitions. It's propaganda designed to seem like education, and the scary thing is that it works. After months of copying these texts, the ideas start feeling natural rather than imposed. Evening meal provides more opportunities for observation and strategic positioning. You've learned to time your arrival to avoid both the rush of eager new women and the purposeful delay of women making status statements. You sit in the same area with the same group, maintaining the careful balance between friendly engagement and competitive awareness. The conversations during evening meals are masterclasses in coded communication. Women discuss the weather while actually sharing information about the Lord's mood. They compliment each other's appearance while providing subtle warnings about administrative scrutiny. They recite classical poetry while actually debating the merits of different advancement strategies. You're becoming fluent in this secondary language. The way a slight emphasis on certain syllables can change meaning. The way a pause in the wrong place can signal uncertainty or deception. The way seemingly casual questions can actually be intelligence-gathering operations. Every conversation operates on multiple levels simultaneously. As the evening winds down, you participate in the final group activity, collective meditation in the main hall. On the surface, it's a peaceful conclusion to the day, a time for spiritual reflection and mental preparation for sleep. In reality, it's another opportunity for surveillance and control. The meditation instructor observes who seems distracted, who appears to be communicating non-verbally with others, who shows signs of emotional distress that might indicate dangerous thoughts. But it's also one of the few times when you can let your guard down slightly. In the shared silence, surrounded by hundreds of other women who are all trapped in the same impossible situation, you sometimes feel something approaching solidarity. Not friendship, that's too dangerous. Not alliance, that requires trust you can't afford, but a recognition that you're all human beings trying to survive in a system designed to reduce you to objects. Back in your sleeping quarters, as you settle onto your thin mat for another night of careful dreaming, you review the day's lessons in strategic invisibility. You spoke when expected but never volunteered information. You demonstrated competence without excellence. You showed appropriate deference to higher-ranked women while maintaining dignity with your peers. You participated in all required activities while revealing nothing about your inner thoughts or private ambitions. You're becoming expert at the compound's most essential skill, hiding your true self so completely that even you sometimes forget who you used to be. It's a survival strategy that works, but the cost is measured in pieces of your soul that disappear a little more each day. Tomorrow you'll wake up and do it all again. The clapper will sound, the routine will repeat, and you'll spend another day practicing the art of being present while remaining invisible, engaged while staying hidden, alive while slowly disappearing. Because in a world where being noticed can be fatal, the ultimate skill is learning how to exist without leaving any trace that you were ever really there. 6 months in, and you've discovered that the compound's most dangerous weapons aren't swords or arrows, they're whispered words and carefully prepared meals. Welcome to the subtle arts of feudal Japanese court intrigue, where a misplaced honorific can ruin your life, and knowing which tea leaves to avoid might be the difference between promotion and permanent sleep. The morning starts with a lesson you weren't expecting: advanced toxicology disguised as cooking instruction. The kitchen supervisor, a former rank 9 concubine, who fell from grace after an unfortunate incident involving a rival's sudden digestive difficulties, teaches you to identify the subtle signs of food tampering, not because you're planning to poison anyone, heaven forbid, but because someone might be planning to poison you. You learn to recognize the slightly bitter aftertaste that might indicate crushed cherry pits, the unusual sweetness that could signal honey mixed with powdered nightshade, the metallic tang that suggests someone has been experimenting with ground minerals. The instructor presents this information as general household knowledge, but everyone understands the real curriculum: how to survive in a building where your breakfast might be your last meal. The compound's administrative staff maintains strict control over food preparation, of course. All meals are prepared by supervised servants using approved ingredients measured out by trusted supervisors. But somehow, women still occasionally develop mysterious illnesses that coincide suspiciously with advancement opportunities or political disputes. The official explanation is usually weak constitution or seasonal imbalance, but everyone knows the real story. Poetry class reveals another layer of compound warfare. You're studying classical forms and traditional themes, but the real education involves learning to recognize coded messages hidden in seemingly innocent verses. A poem about autumn leaves might actually be commentary on the Lord's changing political allegiances. A meditation on cherry blossoms could be a warning about someone's precarious position in the hierarchy. The instructor, a woman who survived 3 different regime changes by perfecting the art of meaningful ambiguity, teaches you to compose verses that can be interpreted multiple ways. Your poem about loyal devotion to seasonal changes can be read as either celebration of stability or subtle critique of stagnation, depending on the reader's perspective and political needs. But here's the fascinating part: the same skills that allow you to hide subversive messages also protect you from being accused of subversion. If your poetry can mean anything, it can't definitively mean something dangerous. You're learning to communicate through plausible deniability, to express thoughts that can't be proven to exist. The afternoon brings music lessons, where you discover that even entertainment is a form of intelligence gathering. The pieces you're taught to perform aren't selected for their artistic merit or your musical development. They're chosen because the Lord's political allies favor certain musical styles, and your ability to perform them competently might provide opportunities to gather useful information during social gatherings. You learn that the Lord's chief military advisor prefers robust folk melodies that remind him of his rural childhood. His financial administrator responds positively to complex instrumental pieces that demonstrate technical sophistication. His diplomatic liaison enjoys traditional court music that signals respect for ancient customs. Your musical education is actually a briefing on the personality profiles and psychological vulnerabilities of powerful men. But the music lessons also provide cover for the compound's most sophisticated communication network. During ensemble practices, women can coordinate complex discussions through rhythmic variations, melodic improvisations, and timing adjustments that would be invisible to casual observers. A slightly delayed entry might signal agreement with a previous conversation. An unexpected harmonic variation could indicate disagreement or concern. You're part of a musical intelligence network that spans the entire compound, capable of sharing information, coordinating responses, and planning collective actions through artistic collaboration. The irony is perfect. The system designed to train you as decorative entertainment objects has inadvertently created the infrastructure for sophisticated resistance operations. The evening lecture series introduces you to the compound's most dangerous skill: psychological manipulation disguised as cultural refinement. Tonight's topic is understanding and responding to masculine temperaments, presented by a senior concubine who has survived 15 years by becoming expert at reading and managing the emotional states of powerful men. The instruction is chilling in its clinical precision. You learn to identify the physical signs of various emotional states, the slight muscle tension that indicates suppressed anger, the specific breathing patterns that suggest sexual interest, the subtle changes in posture that signal political anxiety. More importantly, you learn techniques for responding to these states in ways that advance your own position while making the other person feel that their needs are being understood and met. This isn't seduction, it's applied psychology. You're being trained to become a human comfort object, programmed to provide whatever emotional regulation powerful men require to function effectively. Feeling insecure about a political decision. Here's a concubine, trained to provide reassuring admiration. Struggling with family obligations. Here's someone skilled at making you feel understood without actually expecting any reciprocal emotional support. The most disturbing part is how effective these techniques are on everyone, not just the intended targets. You practice these skills on other concubines during role-playing exercises, and you watch them visibly relax as you deploy the approved methods for creating artificial emotional connection. The training is turning you into someone capable of manufacturing intimacy without feeling it, of providing therapy without expecting healing, of giving emotional labor without receiving recognition that you're working. But you also notice that the women who are most skilled at these techniques seem to have lost something essential about themselves. They can read other people with supernatural accuracy, and respond with perfect emotional calibration, but they seem disconnected from their own feelings, uncertain about their own needs, confused about their own desires. They've become so expert at being what other people need that they've forgotten how to be themselves. The night ends with a special session on maintaining harmony during competitive periods, which translates to how to survive when other women are actively trying to destroy you. The instructor, a former rank 12 concubine, who was demoted after being caught in an alliance that challenged the established order, teaches you to recognize the signs of organized campaign against you. Are other women consistently excluding you from informal conversations? Someone might be spreading rumors about your loyalty or competence. Are your personal belongings mysteriously going missing or being damaged? You're being targeted for psychological warfare designed to destabilize your emotional equilibrium. Are you being assigned to work with women who have reputations for causing problems? You're being set up to fail through guilt by association. The countermeasures are as sophisticated as the attacks. Document everything in ways that can't be directly attributed to you. Build alliances with women who have complementary vulnerabilities, rather than competing interests. Maintain perfect compliance with all official rules while quietly gathering information about rule violations by your opponents. Never respond to provocations directly, instead create situations where your opponents reveal their own aggressive intentions to administrative authorities. You're learning to fight wars where the weapons are social dynamics, and the battlefield is daily life. Victory isn't measured in territory gained, or enemies defeated, but in maintaining your position without being identified as a threat by anyone with power over your fate. As you prepare for sleep, you review the day's lessons in compound survival. You've learned to detect poison in your food, encode messages in your poetry, coordinate resistance through musical performance, manipulate psychological states through emotional labor, and defend yourself against social warfare while maintaining perfect innocence. These are skills that would be impressive in any context, but in this context, they're the minimum requirements for staying alive. You're becoming expert at arts of survival that most people never imagine exist, developing capabilities that are simultaneously empowering and horrifying. Because the most effective way to survive in a system designed to reduce you to an object is to become expert at all the ways objects can be weaponized. You're learning to turn your own objectification into a tool for psychological warfare, to use your captivity as camouflage for resistance operations, to transform your oppression into a source of strategic advantage. The irony is that the system designed to break you is actually making you more formidable than you ever imagined possible. You're developing skills in manipulation, intelligence gathering, psychological warfare, and strategic thinking that would make professional spies envious. The question that keeps you awake at night is whether becoming expert at surviving imprisonment is the same thing as finding freedom, or whether you're just becoming a more sophisticated kind of prisoner. Either way, tomorrow you'll wake up and practice these arts again. Because in a compound where poetry can kill and breakfast might be your last meal, the alternative to becoming dangerous is becoming dead. 1 year in, and you've learned that the compound operates on a currency more valuable than gold, the Lord's attention. Every woman here is engaged in a complex economic system, where glances are investments, conversations are commodities, and a single moment of genuine interest can transform your entire social position. Welcome to the attention economy, where market forces are measured in heartbeats, and currency fluctuates based on mood. The morning begins with intelligence briefings disguised as gossip sessions. While you're getting dressed in your regulation kimono, other women share crucial market information about the Lord's current preferences, recent political pressures, and emotional state. Is he preoccupied with military preparations? Opportunities for women with strategic knowledge? Is he dealing with family tensions? Market opens for emotional comfort specialists. Has he been reading poetry lately? Literary skills are trending upward. This information isn't shared altruistically, it's traded. The woman who tells you about the Lord's recent interest in traditional music expects reciprocal intelligence about administrative policy changes. The concubine who mentions his dietary preferences is positioning herself to receive information about schedule changes that might create advancement opportunities. You've learned to participate in this intelligence market carefully. Too eager to share information, and you'll be seen as desperate or untrustworthy. Too secretive, and you'll be excluded from the networks that might save your life. The key is developing a reputation for reliable, valuable intelligence while never revealing information that could be used against you. The breakfast routine has evolved into a complex social mapping exercise. You can read the entire compound's political situation by observing seating patterns, conversation groupings, and subtle body language cues. The woman sitting alone near the window has fallen from favor and is being socially quarantined. The cluster of mid-level concubines speaking in unusually quiet voices are planning something that requires coordination. The senior woman eating mechanically while staring into space has received bad news about her family or her position. But the most important information comes from watching the servants. They move through the compound with access to all areas and all conversations. More importantly, they're invisible to most concubines, which means they observe interactions that women think are private. A servant's slight nod, when you ask about the Lord's schedule, tells you more about your current standing than any official evaluation. The educational sessions have become opportunities for market manipulation. During poetry class, women compete to demonstrate knowledge of the Lord's favorite literary styles, but they also share information designed to mislead potential competitors. A casual comment about his preference for melancholy themes might be accurate intelligence or deliberate misinformation, designed to waste other women's preparation time. You've developed your own strategy, become expert at reading the instructor's reactions rather than listening to other students' claims. The woman teaching poetry has been in the compound for 12 years. She's observed the Lord's actual preferences, not just the preferences other concubines claim he has. Her slight smile when someone recites a particular style, her barely perceptible nod when a theme is mentioned. These micro-expressions provide more reliable market intelligence than any gossip network. The afternoon brings individual skill development time, which has evolved into the compound's version of venture capital investing. You're not just practicing arts that might lead to advancement opportunities, you're developing specialized skills that could provide unique value propositions. The woman focusing on medical knowledge is betting that the Lord's aging body will create demands for health-related expertise. The concubine studying regional dialects is positioning herself for diplomatic opportunities involving visitors from other provinces. Your own investment strategy focuses on information management. You're becoming expert at calligraphy, not just for its aesthetic value, but because beautiful handwriting provides opportunities to handle correspondence, administrative documents, and record-keeping tasks. Access to written information means access to intelligence about political developments, financial decisions, and personnel changes that affect the entire compound. But you're also developing skills in information analysis and presentation. You practice creating summaries that make complex information accessible, organizing data in ways that support decision-making, and presenting findings that demonstrate your analytical capabilities, without revealing your intelligence-gathering methods. These meta skills might prove more valuable than any specific artistic accomplishment. The evening brings the compound's most sophisticated attention trading opportunities, the informal gathering periods where women demonstrate their accomplishments for each other and potentially for administrative observers. These sessions operate like auditions, investment presentations, and job interviews simultaneously. Women perform musical pieces designed to showcase their technical skills while also demonstrating their understanding of the Lord's aesthetic preferences. They recite poetry that reveals their cultural knowledge while positioning themselves as potential advisors on literary matters. They engage in conversations that display their political awareness while maintaining appropriate deference to established hierarchies. But the real action happens in the peripheral interactions, the brief conversations between performances, the subtle alliances formed through shared appreciation of artistic excellence, the information exchanges that occur when women are relaxed and focused on creative expression, rather than competitive positioning. You've learned to use these sessions for strategic networking, not networking in the modern sense of professional relationship building, but networking as intelligence gathering and alliance formation. You identify women whose skills complement rather than compete with yours. You cultivate relationships with concubines, who have access to different information sources. You build reputation as someone reliable, discreet, and potentially useful for collaborative projects. The most valuable relationships are with women who've learned to work within the system while maintaining some sense of personal integrity. They understand that survival requires strategic thinking and tactical flexibility, but they haven't completely abandoned their own values or lost their ability to form genuine human connections. These women become your real allies, not because you're plotting against the system, but because you're helping each other remain human while navigating an inhuman situation. The night ends with private reflection time, when you review the day's attention market fluctuations and plan your positioning strategies for tomorrow. You analyze which of your investments in skill development are showing returns, which relationships are providing valuable intelligence, and which aspects of your personal brand are generating positive recognition versus unwanted scrutiny. You're maintaining detailed mental records of the Lord's documented preferences, the changing political pressures affecting the compound, the advancement patterns of successful concubines, and the failure modes that have destroyed other women's prospects. This isn't obsessive planning, it's survival research. But you're also struggling with the psychological costs of treating your own humanity as a market commodity. The skills that make you successful in the attention economy, emotional manipulation, strategic relationship building, calculated authenticity, are changing who you are as a person. You're becoming expert at being whoever other people need you to be, but losing track of who you actually are underneath all the performance. The woman in the mirror each morning looks like you, wears your face, speaks with your voice, but she's become a strategic construction, a carefully crafted persona designed to navigate social and political challenges that require abandoning most forms of genuine self-expression. You're not sure whether you're successfully adapting to the compound's demands, or slowly disappearing into a role you've learned to perform too well. As sleep approaches, you wonder whether the attention economy will eventually provide opportunities for advancement and improved conditions, or whether it's just a more sophisticated form of the same fundamental problem, a system that reduces human beings to their utility value for other people's purposes. Either way, tomorrow you'll wake up and participate in the market again. Because in a world where attention is the only currency and your humanity is the product being sold, the alternative to successful marketing is complete invisibility. And invisibility, in a compound full of women competing for limited resources and even more limited recognition, is just another way of disappearing entirely. 18 months into your compound life, and you're about to experience your first major festival, not a celebration of freedom or joy, but a carefully orchestrated performance where every woman becomes an actress in a play about happiness, prosperity, and contentment. Welcome to the Festival of Seasonal Harmony, where your ability to project artificial joy might determine your survival for the next year. The preparations begin weeks in advance, and they reveal the compound's most sophisticated form of psychological control, forced celebration. Every woman is assigned specific roles in creating an atmosphere of festive contentment for the Lord and his important visitors. You're not just required to be happy, you're required to demonstrate happiness so convincing that powerful men will believe the women in their compound are genuinely fulfilled by their circumstances. Your assignment is costume coordination for the lower-ranked concubines, a task that sounds simple until you understand its real requirements. You're responsible for ensuring that 40 women appear festive, beautiful, and spontaneously joyful while wearing identical regulation kimonos and maintaining the careful hierarchy that prevents any individual from standing out inappropriately. The fabric selections reveal the compound's attention to psychological manipulation. The colors chosen for your rank group, soft pastels that suggest innocence and contentment, are designed to make you appear younger, more vulnerable, and less threatening than you actually are. The patterns, seasonal motifs like cherry blossoms and flowing water, reinforce themes of natural harmony and acceptance of cyclical change. But you're also learning to read the deeper messages embedded in these choices. The women assigned to wear deep reds and golds are being positioned as symbols of prosperity and abundance. Those in white and silver represent purity and spiritual refinement. The color coordination isn't just aesthetic. It's a complex visual argument about the compound's success in creating harmonious, well-ordered beauty. The rehearsals for festival performances are masterclasses in collective psychological manipulation. You practice group dances that emphasize synchronized movement and unified expression. Individual artistic contributions are carefully choreographed to appear spontaneous while actually following precise scripts designed to reinforce specific themes about the benefits of hierarchical social organization. During music rehearsals, you learn pieces that celebrate the wisdom of accepting your assigned role, the beauty of collaborative effort, and the deep satisfaction that comes from perfect service to worthy superiors. The lyrics are poetic enough to seem like genuine artistic expression, but the messages are propaganda designed to convince both performers and audience that the compound system creates authentic happiness. The most disturbing aspect of festival preparation is watching how effective this forced celebration becomes. Women who've spent months navigating the compound's competitive tensions and psychological pressures begin to experience genuine moments of joy during rehearsals. The collaborative creative work, the shared focus on artistic excellence, the temporary suspension of individual competition, these elements create brief experiences of authentic community. But you recognize this as another form of manipulation. The system occasionally provides genuine positive experiences specifically to make the overall oppression more bearable. The festival creates real moments of beauty, creativity, and human connection. Not as accidental byproducts, but as calculated elements in a larger strategy of psychological control. Your role in costume coordination provides opportunities to observe the compound's most sophisticated women during vulnerable moments. When concubines are being fitted for special festival garments, they reveal concerns, ambitions, and fears they normally keep hidden. The woman worried about her costume being too elaborate is actually concerned about attracting unwanted administrative scrutiny. The concubine requesting subtle modifications is positioning herself for specific advancement opportunities. You learn to provide costume consultation that functions as informal psychological counseling. A suggestion about color choices becomes a discussion of strategic positioning. Advice about accessory selection becomes analysis of political risk assessment. Assistance with fabric arrangements becomes collaboration on social navigation strategies. These conversations reveal the festival's deeper purpose. It's an evaluation period disguised as celebration. The Lord and his advisors will observe every woman's performance, demeanor, and social interactions to make decisions about future role assignments, advancement opportunities, and potential removals from the compound. The women who understand this perform festival joy while simultaneously conducting intelligence operations. They observe which concubines are being showcased in prominent roles, who's being positioned near important visitors, and what messages the administrative staff is trying to communicate through the visual and performative elements of the celebration. But the most skilled women use the festival as cover for their own strategic operations. The collaborative rehearsals provide opportunities for building alliances that would be suspicious under normal circumstances. The costume fittings create legitimate reasons for private conversations. The performance preparations allow for information sharing that would normally violate compound communication restrictions. You're part of a network that's using the festival as infrastructure for a sophisticated intelligence and mutual aid operation. The same women who compete ruthlessly for advancement opportunities during regular periods cooperate strategically during festival preparations to gather information, share resources, and coordinate responses to anticipated administrative changes. The week before the festival brings the most intensive preparation individual coaching sessions where senior concubines teach newer women how to project appropriate emotional states during public appearances. You learn techniques for manufacturing spontaneous-looking smiles, creating the appearance of genuine enthusiasm, and maintaining expressions of contentment even during stressful or uncomfortable situations. But you also learn to read the psychological costs these techniques impose. The women teaching these skills have perfected them over years of practice, but they've also lost the ability to experience genuine emotions naturally. They can produce any required emotional expression on command, but they seem disconnected from their own authentic feelings, uncertain about what they actually want or need beyond survival and advancement within the system. The training includes instruction in group emotional regulation, how to maintain collective moods that support the festival's required atmosphere. If one woman shows signs of distress, sadness, or inappropriate emotional responses, others are trained to subtly intervene through supportive gestures, redirecting conversations and modeling appropriate emotional states. You're learning to function as part of an emotional management collective where individual psychological needs are subordinated to the group's requirement to present a unified appearance of happiness and satisfaction. It's sophisticated emotional labor disguised as community support. The night before the festival, you participate in the final preparation ritual, the application of cosmetics designed to create the appearance of natural health, youth, and vitality. The makeup isn't just about beauty. It's about creating visual evidence that the compound system produces women who are physically and emotionally thriving. But the cosmetics also function as psychological preparation. The process of transforming your appearance creates distance between your everyday self and your festival persona. You're literally putting on a mask that allows you to perform required emotional states while maintaining some psychological protection for your authentic self. As you look in the polished bronze mirror, you see a young woman who appears happy, healthy, and genuinely content with her circumstances. The cosmetics have created an illusion so convincing that even you feel momentarily persuaded by it. The festival preparation has transformed you into a work of art designed to support a political argument about the benefits of hierarchical social organization. Tomorrow you'll perform this version of yourself for powerful men who need to believe that their system of human ownership creates authentic human flourishing. You'll demonstrate joy that supports their worldview while maintaining enough authentic humanity to survive the psychological costs of the performance. But tonight, in the quiet moments before sleep, you allow yourself to remember who you were before you learned to manufacture happiness on command. Because the most important skill for surviving the Festival of Masks isn't learning to wear them convincingly, it's remembering that underneath the performance the person who entered this compound 18 months ago is still there, still human, still real, even if she's becoming harder to find with each passing day. 5 years in the compound, and you've achieved something that seemed impossible when you first arrived: genuine influence. As a rank 7 concubine with administrative responsibilities, you now participate in decisions about compound operations, resource allocation, and personnel management. You've become part of the system's decision-making apparatus, which means you're no longer just surviving oppression, you're helping to administer it. The senior council meetings take place in a room most women never see, decorated with artwork that celebrates the harmony achieved through proper hierarchical organization. You sit on silk cushions alongside women who've spent decades mastering the compound's most sophisticated survival strategies, discussing issues that affect hundreds of lives with the clinical detachment of experienced administrators. Today's agenda includes evaluating applications for library privileges, reviewing disciplinary recommendations for protocol violations, and planning resource allocations for the upcoming Harvest Festival. On the surface, these seem like routine administrative matters, In reality, they're decisions about which women receive opportunities for intellectual development, who faces punishment that could destroy their advancement prospects, and how the compound will present itself to important visitors who influence political support for the entire system. Your vote matters. The recommendations you make affect real people's lives in measurable ways. The analysis you provide influences policies that determine whether specific women receive medical care, educational opportunities, or advancement possibilities. You've gained the power to help or harm other women through institutional mechanisms rather than just social manipulation. But every decision operates within parameters established by the compound's fundamental structure. You can influence how the system functions but not whether it should exist. You can advocate for more humane treatment of new arrivals, but not for their freedom. You can push for better living conditions, educational opportunities, and advancement mechanisms, but always within the context of maintaining an institution designed to reduce human beings to valuable objects. The psychological complexity is overwhelming. You're using power gained through your own oppression to make decisions about other people's oppression. You're working to improve conditions within a system that shouldn't exist while knowing that your improvements make the system more sustainable and therefore more harmful in the long term. Every humanitarian reform you advocate strengthens the institutional structure that holds everyone captive. The other senior concubines navigate these moral contradictions with various strategies. Some embrace complete pragmatism. They focus exclusively on maximizing benefits for women within the existing system while avoiding questions about the system's legitimacy. Others develop elaborate philosophical justifications for their participation, arguing that hierarchical social organization reflects natural law, and that their role involves perfecting rather than challenging cosmic order. A few maintain what might be called principled resistance. They use their positions to subvert compound operations in subtle ways while maintaining the appearance of loyal service. They manipulate resource allocations to benefit women who need support. They influence advancement decisions to reward qualities the system doesn't officially value, and they use their access to information to warn women about potential dangers. Your own approach combines elements of all these strategies while acknowledging their fundamental inadequacy. You work to improve conditions for individual women while recognizing that your efforts help legitimize a system that destroys human freedom. You gather intelligence about potential opportunities for resistance while knowing that effective resistance would require sacrificing the position that gives you access to that intelligence. The most disturbing aspect of your role is how naturally you've adapted to thinking in institutional terms. When evaluating requests for medical care, you automatically consider budget implications, precedent concerns, and potential effects on compound morale. When reviewing disciplinary cases, you analyze the strategic necessity of punishment, the deterrent effects on other women, and the administrative costs of different enforcement approaches. You've internalized the compound's logic so completely that you can perform complex institutional analysis while barely noticing that you're reducing human suffering to variables in administrative equations. The system has succeeded in transforming you into someone capable of making decisions that cause harm while genuinely believing you're working to minimize that harm within realistic constraints. But your position also provides unprecedented access to information about compound operations, political relationships, and strategic vulnerabilities. You know which officials are embezzling resources, which administrative procedures are being violated by staff members, and which political alliances support the compound's continued existence. This knowledge creates opportunities for influence that extend beyond formal administrative channels. The informal power networks among senior concubines operate through methods that would impress professional intelligence agencies. Information is shared through coded references during official meetings, through artistic collaborations that provide cover for strategic discussions, and through mentorship relationships that create opportunities for transmitting sensitive knowledge across generational lines. You're part of a sophisticated information economy where intelligence about administrative corruption, political vulnerabilities, and institutional weaknesses is traded for influence over specific decisions, protection from potential threats, and access to resources that aren't available through official channels. The same skills you developed for survival as a new arrival have evolved into capabilities for managing complex political operations. But the most valuable intelligence involves understanding the personal psychology of the Lord and his key advisors. Through careful observation during the rare occasions when you're in their presence, through analysis of their decision patterns, and through information shared by women who've had more direct contact, you've developed detailed profiles of their personalities, motivations, and manipulable vulnerabilities. This knowledge allows you to influence compound policies by crafting proposals that appeal to specific psychological needs rather than rational analysis. The Lord responds positively to suggestions that enhance his reputation for enlightened leadership. His primary advisor can be swayed by arguments that emphasize efficiency and cost reduction. The administrative supervisor appreciates recommendations that reduce his workload while maintaining appearance of rigorous oversight. You've become expert at translating humanitarian goals into language that appeals to the self-interest of people with decision-making power. Your proposal for improved medical care emphasizes the economic benefits of maintaining women's health rather than ethical arguments about human dignity. Your recommendation for expanded educational opportunities focuses on enhancing the compound's reputation rather than women's right to intellectual development. This translation process requires psychological compartmentalization that's both necessary and damaging. You have to suppress awareness of the moral implications of your rhetorical strategies while maintaining enough ethical sensitivity to identify goals worth pursuing. You need to manipulate people without losing your ability to form genuine relationships. You must participate in dehumanizing institutional processes while preserving enough humanity to recognize when those processes cause unnecessary harm. The Senior Council meeting concludes with assignments for the next month's projects. You're responsible for developing new orientation procedures for incoming women, reviewing current educational curriculum for relevance to evolving political requirements, and conducting performance evaluations for mid-level administrative personnel. These tasks will affect dozens of women's lives while reinforcing the institutional structures that constrain your own existence. As you leave the administrative building and walk through corridors that have become as familiar as childhood memories, you pass women at every stage of the compound's processing system. New arrivals practicing basic protocol with the desperate intensity of people who understand their survival depends on perfect compliance. Mid-level concubines engaged in the complex social negotiations that determine their advancement prospects. Senior women like yourself, moving through the compound with the quiet authority that comes from understanding how power operates within institutional constraints. Each of these women represents a different stage in the process you've completed, the transformation from independent person to institutional asset. But you also recognize that each represents a different potential future, depending on choices that haven't been made yet and opportunities that haven't yet emerged. The question that haunts your quiet moments isn't whether you've made the right choices to survive within the compound system. The question is whether survival that requires abandoning fundamental aspects of your humanity can be considered success, or whether you've simply become a more sophisticated victim of the same forces that captured you 5 years ago. Tonight you'll review personnel files and draft policy recommendations that will shape other women's lives in ways they may never understand. You'll use influence gained through your own captivity to make decisions about other people's captivity. You'll work to improve a system that shouldn't exist while knowing that your improvements make it more difficult for anyone to imagine alternatives. Because the compound's ultimate victory isn't just capturing your body or controlling your behavior. It's transforming you into someone who participates willingly in your own oppression while believing you're working to minimize the harm that oppression causes. The system has succeeded in making you complicit in your own captivity. And the most terrifying part is that you're not sure there was any alternative that wouldn't have been worse. 7 years in the compound, and the impossible has happened. You've been selected for regular private audiences with the Lord himself. This isn't the romantic fantasy that young women imagine when they hear stories about concubines. This is psychological warfare conducted through intimate conversation, where every word could elevate your status or destroy your life, and where the most dangerous weapon is your ability to make a powerful man feel understood. The first summons arrives at dawn, delivered by a servant whose impassive expression reveals nothing about why you've been chosen or what expectations you're supposed to fulfill. You're given 2 hours to prepare, not just physically, but psychologically, for an encounter that could transform your entire existence within the compound or mark the beginning of your elimination from it. The preparation process reveals how much you've internalized the compound's mechanisms of control. You automatically select clothing that projects competence without suggesting ambition, arrange your appearance to seem naturally beautiful without obvious artifice, and mentally rehearse conversation topics that demonstrate intelligence while avoiding any hint of independent political opinions. But you also engage in more sophisticated preparation based on intelligence you've gathered about the Lord's current psychological state, recent political pressures, and personal preoccupations. He's been dealing with succession planning issues that create anxiety about family loyalty. He's facing economic pressures that require careful resource management. He's managing relationships with political allies who have conflicting interests and competing demands on his attention. This information allows you to prepare for conversations that provide what he actually needs, rather than what he might expect from a concubine. You're not preparing to be decorative or sexually available. You're preparing to function as an informal advisor, confidential sounding board, and psychological support system for someone whose position requires making decisions that affect thousands of lives. The Lord's private quarters occupy an entire wing of the compound, designed to create an atmosphere of refined masculinity and understated power. The architecture emphasizes natural materials, traditional craftsmanship, and artistic elements that suggest cultural sophistication rather than mere wealth. Everything is beautiful, expensive, and designed to reinforce his identity as someone whose authority derives from superior aesthetic judgment and spiritual refinement. But you've learned to read the psychological subtext of these design choices. The excessive emphasis on traditional elements suggests anxiety about legitimacy and continuity. The careful balance between luxury and restraint indicates concern about political perception and resource allocation. The artistic selections reveal personal tastes that don't align perfectly with public expectations, creating subtle tensions between private preferences and political requirements. Your first private audience lasts 3 hours and covers topics that would surprise anyone with conventional ideas about what powerful men want from the women they control. He asks for your analysis of administrative efficiency in the compound's educational programs. He requests your opinion about resource allocation priorities for the upcoming winter months. He wants to understand personnel dynamics among senior concubines that might affect institutional stability. But beneath these apparently practical conversations, you recognize more complex psychological needs. He's looking for someone who can listen without judgment to concerns he can't share with political advisors. He needs feedback from someone whose position creates genuine investment in the compound's success, but whose perspective isn't shaped by masculine competition or political ambition. He wants to test ideas and explore options with someone intelligent enough to understand implications but dependent enough to maintain absolute discretion. You're functioning as an unpaid therapist, strategic consultant, and confidential advisor rolled into a relationship that gives him complete power over your life while requiring him to trust you with information that could be politically damaging if misused. The dynamic is simultaneously intimate and exploitative, intellectually stimulating, and psychologically dangerous. The conversation skills you've developed during 7 years in the compound prove invaluable. You can read his emotional state through micro-expressions, vocal patterns, and body language cues. You can provide psychological support without appearing to offer therapy. You can engage with complex political analysis while maintaining appropriate deference to his decision-making authority. But most importantly, you can help him feel understood without requiring reciprocal emotional support. The relationship is entirely one-directional. You provide intellectual stimulation, emotional regulation, and psychological comfort, while receiving nothing except the precarious security that comes from being temporarily valuable to someone with absolute power over your fate. Over subsequent months, these private audiences become a regular feature of your compound existence. You're summoned 2 or 3 times per week for conversations that range from personal philosophy to administrative strategy, from family concerns to political analysis. You've become his primary source of honest feedback about institutional operations and a crucial element in his psychological maintenance system. But this position creates new forms of danger that make your previous compound challenges seem straightforward. Other women view your special status with combinations of envy, calculation, and strategic positioning that transform every social interaction into a potential intelligence-gathering operation. Senior administrators monitor your behavior for signs of inappropriate ambition or dangerous influence. Even your allies become potential security risks because information about your conversations with the Lord could be valuable to his political enemies. The knowledge you gain through these private audiences provides unprecedented insight into compound operations, political relationships, and strategic planning. You learn about budget allocations, personnel decisions, and policy changes before they're announced. You understand the political pressures that shape administrative choices and the personal considerations that influence the Lord's decision-making processes. This information creates opportunities for influencing compound policies in ways that benefit other women, but it also creates responsibility for consequences you can't fully predict or control. When you suggest modifications to educational programs, those changes affect hundreds of women's intellectual development. When you provide analysis about resource allocation, your recommendations influence living conditions, medical care, and advancement opportunities throughout the compound. Your influence operates through suggestion and implication rather than direct advocacy. You can't openly argue for policy changes that challenge the compound's fundamental structure, but you can frame observations and questions that lead the Lord to conclusions that improve conditions for other women. The process requires sophisticated understanding of his psychology, careful timing of conversations, and strategic patience that operates on timescales measured in months rather than days. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of your position is how naturally you've adapted to thinking like someone with institutional authority. When discussing administrative challenges, you automatically consider efficiency metrics, budget constraints, and political implications rather than human costs. When analyzing personnel issues, you evaluate women's value to the compound system rather than their individual needs or aspirations. The Lord values your perspective precisely because you've internalized institutional priorities while maintaining enough connection to the women's experience to provide realistic assessments of policy's effects. You've become someone capable of thinking simultaneously from the perspective of management and labor, of understanding both the system's requirements and its human costs. This dual perspective makes you valuable to the Lord, but psychologically corrosive to your own sense of identity. You're helping to perfect a system of human exploitation, while genuinely caring about the women trapped within it. You're using influence gained through your own oppression to make decisions about other people's oppression, while telling yourself that incremental improvements justify your participation in fundamental injustice. The private audiences also create unexpected moments of human connection that complicate the inherently exploitative relationship. Sometimes the Lord shares genuine concerns about family relationships, personal failures, or fears about mortality that reveal his humanity beneath the political role. These moments create temptation to feel sympathy for someone whose power makes him as psychologically isolated as the women he controls. But you've learned to recognize these moments as the relationship's most dangerous elements. Genuine emotional connection with someone who owns you creates illusions of mutuality that mask the fundamental power imbalance. Feeling sympathy for your captor doesn't change the relationship structure. It just makes it harder to maintain the psychological distance necessary for survival. As your second year of private audiences begins, you realize you've achieved a form of success that would have been unimaginable when you first entered the compound. You have regular access to the most powerful person in the province, influence over decisions that affect hundreds of lives, and privileges that most concubines can only dream about. But success within an oppressive system is still oppression. The compound's walls still surround you, your freedom still depends entirely on maintaining someone else's approval, and your humanity is still reduced to your utility value for institutional purposes. The only difference is that your cage is now beautiful enough, and your responsibilities significant enough that sometimes you forget you're still a prisoner, and that forgetting, that adaptation, that acceptance, that's the compound's ultimate victory over your independence. Because the most effective prison isn't one you want to escape, it's one that makes you believe you're exactly where you belong. 9 years in the compound, and you've become part of a conspiracy that exists in the spaces between words, in glances that last a fraction too long, in gestures that mean nothing to casual observers, but everything to women who've learned to read the compound's secret languages. Welcome to the rebellion that can never be spoken, never be planned, and never be executed, but somehow still changes everything. It begins, as most dangerous things do, with a death that shouldn't have happened. Midori, a rank 5 concubine, who'd spent 8 years navigating the compound's challenges with intelligence and grace, dies during a routine medical procedure that other women have survived without complications. The official explanation mentions pre-existing conditions and unfortunate reactions to treatment. The unofficial truth, whispered in fragments across weeks of careful conversations, tells a different story. Midori had been gathering information about financial irregularities in compound administration. She'd discovered that resources allocated for women's medical care, educational programs, and living improvements were being diverted to personal accounts controlled by senior staff members. She'd been preparing to present this information during her regular audience with the Lord, not as accusation, but as analysis of institutional inefficiencies that might interest someone concerned about administrative performance. Her death occurs 3 days before that scheduled audience. The medical emergency happens during a treatment session supervised by the same administrator whose financial activities she'd been investigating. The procedure goes wrong in ways that experienced healers describe as unlikely but not impossible. The timing is suspicious but not provably intentional. But for women who've spent years learning to read the compound's unspoken communications, the message is clear: gathering information that threatens administrative interests can be fatal. The system will protect itself through methods that maintain plausible deniability, while delivering unmistakable warnings to anyone considering similar activities. The response isn't organized resistance in any conventional sense. There are no secret meetings, no written plans, no explicit agreements about collective action. Instead, there's a gradual shift in behavior patterns that's almost invisible to administrative observers, but clearly recognizable to women who understand the compound's social dynamics. Women begin making subtle changes to daily routines that create opportunities for information sharing without violating official protocols. Educational sessions become more collaborative, with participants helping each other understand concepts that extend beyond approved curriculum. Artistic activities include coded references to administrative problems, resource shortages, and personnel issues that affect women's welfare. You find yourself participating in this unnamed, unplanned movement through choices that feel individual but create collective patterns. When reviewing educational programs, you emphasize critical thinking skills that aren't officially part of the curriculum. When mentoring newer women, you provide information about compound operations that helps them navigate challenges more effectively. When participating in administrative meetings, you ask questions that highlight resource allocation problems and personnel issues that affect women's conditions. But the most significant development involves changes in how senior concubines use their influence during private audiences with the Lord and other compound officials. Instead of focusing exclusively on incremental improvements within existing systems, women begin introducing questions and observations that challenge underlying assumptions about compound operations. The process is sophisticated and carefully coordinated, without ever being explicitly planned. During your own audiences, you begin asking the Lord to explain the philosophical foundations of compound policies, the historical development of current practices, and the intended outcomes of institutional structures. These questions appear to demonstrate intellectual curiosity and loyal interest in understanding his vision more completely. But the cumulative effect of multiple women asking similar questions creates pressure for the Lord to articulate justifications for policies that have operated on tradition and assumption, rather than logical analysis. When forced to explain why certain administrative procedures exist, why specific restrictions are necessary, and how current practices serve stated institutional goals, he begins recognizing inconsistencies and inefficiencies that he'd never examined critically. The strategy works because it doesn't challenge his authority directly. Instead, it positions him as the ultimate arbiter of institutional improvement, the person responsible for identifying and correcting problems that interfere with optimal compound operations. The women providing this analysis appear to be loyal supporters helping him achieve his own stated objectives, rather than critics questioning the legitimacy of compound existence. But you and other senior concubines understand that this approach creates opportunities for systemic change that direct resistance could never achieve. By making the Lord question specific policies and procedures, you're creating space for modifications that improve women's conditions while appearing to strengthen rather than challenge institutional authority. The informal coordination required for this strategy develops through the same networks you've been building for years: artistic collaborations, mentorship relationships, administrative cooperation, and social interactions that provide cover for sharing information and coordinating responses. But now these networks serve explicitly political purposes, rather than just survival and advancement goals. The most remarkable aspect of this unnamed rebellion is how it transforms individual survival strategies into collective resistance activities. The same skills you developed for navigating compound hierarchies, managing relationships with officials, and advancing within institutional structures, become tools for subtly undermining the system's efficiency and legitimacy. Women who've spent years perfecting techniques for emotional manipulation, information gathering, and strategic positioning, discover that these capabilities can be used to influence compound policies in ways that benefit everyone, rather than just individual advancement. The psychological weapons the system taught you to use for personal survival become instruments of collective liberation. But the rebellion's unnamed nature also reflects its fundamental limitations. You can influence how the compound operates, but not whether it should exist. You can improve conditions for women within the system, but not create opportunities for them to leave the system. You can modify policies that cause unnecessary suffering, but not eliminate the institutional structures that reduce human beings to valuable objects. The most successful interventions involve identifying genuine inefficiencies and contradictions within existing policies, rather than challenging the compound's fundamental purposes. When you demonstrate that current educational programs don't adequately prepare women for their assigned roles, the Lord authorizes curriculum improvements that happen to expand intellectual opportunities. When you show that resource allocation procedures create waste and corruption, he implements oversight mechanisms that happen to improve women's living conditions. These victories are real but limited. Women receive better medical care, expanded educational opportunities, improved living conditions, and more rational advancement procedures. But they remain prisoners whose freedom depends entirely on maintaining institutional approval, and whose humanity is still reduced to their utility value for compound purposes. The rebellion's most profound effect might be psychological rather than practical. Participating in coordinated efforts to improve compound conditions creates experiences of collective agency that contrast sharply with the individual competition and mutual surveillance that normally dominate women's relationships. Working together toward shared goals, even within severe constraints, provides reminders of what human solidarity might feel like under different circumstances. But these experiences also highlight the tragedy of your situation. The intelligence, creativity, organizational skills, and collaborative capabilities you've developed during 9 years in the compound represent human potential that could accomplish remarkable things under conditions of genuine freedom. Instead, those capabilities are channeled into making imprisonment more humane rather than creating opportunities for escape. As winter approaches and you review the previous year's accomplishments, curriculum improvements, resource allocation reforms, administrative oversight enhancements, and policy clarifications that benefit women throughout the compound, you recognize that you've participated in the most successful resistance movement possible within the system's constraints. You've also participated in making the system more efficient, more rational, and more humane, which makes it more sustainable, and therefore more effective at accomplishing its fundamental purpose, transforming independent human beings into valuable institutional assets who participate willingly in their own oppression. The rebellion that never was has succeeded in improving prison conditions while strengthening the prison itself, and perhaps that's the compound's ultimate victory, creating circumstances where even resistance serves institutional purposes, where even rebellion reinforces the structures it attempts to challenge. Because the most sophisticated form of control isn't preventing resistance, it's channeling resistance into activities that strengthen the system being resisted. The compound has succeeded in making you rebels who fight for better captivity rather than freedom. And the most terrifying realization is that, given the realistic alternatives, this might actually represent the best possible outcome. 11 years in the compound, and your body has accomplished what your mind couldn't. It's created a person whose existence will either elevate your status beyond anything you previously imagined, or destroy you more completely than any punishment the system has yet devised. You're pregnant with the Lord's child, and suddenly every calculation about survival, advancement and resistance must be recalculated around a tiny human being, whose needs will take precedence over everything else in your life. The pregnancy announcement transforms you from a senior concubine with administrative responsibilities into a strategic asset, whose value to the compound has increased exponentially. But it also transforms you into a potential threat, whose child could disrupt succession planning, create political complications, and challenge the established order in ways that might require your elimination, despite your elevated status. The medical care you receive becomes luxurious compared to standard compound provisions. Private physicians, special dietary allocations, adjusted work schedules, and living quarters designed to ensure optimal conditions for fetal development. You're treated like precious cargo, not because you're valued as a person, but because you're carrying something that belongs to the Lord and might serve important political purposes. But the enhanced care comes with enhanced surveillance. Your daily activities are monitored more closely. Your social interactions are scrutinized for signs of inappropriate influences, and your emotional state is evaluated regularly to ensure psychological stability. The same officials who now treat you with elaborate courtesy are also gathering intelligence about your loyalties, your ambitions, and your potential reliability as the mother of someone who might eventually hold political power. The other concubines' responses to your pregnancy reveal the compound's social dynamics in their most crystallized form. Some offer genuine congratulations and support, recognizing that your success could create opportunities for everyone if you use your elevated status strategically. Others calculate how your advancement affects their own prospects and adjust their behavior accordingly. A few see your pregnancy as a threat to their own positions and begin positioning themselves as alternatives if your situation doesn't develop as expected. But the most complex reactions come from women who've been in the compound long enough to understand the full implications of bearing the Lord's child. They know that pregnancy creates as many dangers as opportunities, that motherhood within the compound system involves responsibilities and restrictions that make your previous constraints seem simple, and that children born in this environment face futures determined entirely by political calculations, rather than parental love. Your private audiences with the Lord continue, but their nature changes dramatically. Instead of strategic discussions about compound administration, the conversations focus on your health, your emotional state, and your thoughts about child-rearing approaches that will prepare the child for whatever role political circumstances might require. You're being evaluated as a potential mother rather than consulted as an advisor, but these conversations also provide unprecedented access to the Lord's personal psychology and family planning considerations. You learn about his concerns regarding succession, his relationships with other children, and his expectations for how this child might fit into broader political strategies. This information creates opportunities for influencing decisions that will affect your child's future, but it also creates responsibility for making choices that serve political purposes rather than maternal instincts. The compound's administrative procedures for managing pregnant concubines reveal the institution's sophisticated approach to human resource development. You're assigned to modified duties that maintain your engagement with compound operations while accommodating physical limitations. Your educational schedule is adjusted to include instruction in child care, family psychology, and political strategy relevant to raising children who might hold significant power. But you're also required to participate in planning sessions that discuss various scenarios for your child's future role within the compound system or broader political structure. These conversations treat your unborn child as a strategic asset, whose value depends on political developments you can't control, and whose welfare might require decisions that contradict every maternal instinct you're developing. The pregnancy allows you to observe aspects of compound operations that are normally hidden from concubines. You gain access to medical facilities, administrative areas, and political discussions that reveal the institution's connections to broader power networks. You understand better how the compound functions within larger political and economic systems, and how decisions about individual women's lives reflect considerations that extend far beyond institutional boundaries. This expanded perspective provides opportunities for gathering intelligence that could be valuable for future resistance activities, but it also creates awareness of how constrained those activities actually are. The compound isn't an isolated institution that could be reformed or eliminated through internal pressure. It's an integral part of political and economic networks that depend on its continued existence and effective operation. Your pregnancy becomes a lens through which you understand the compound's ultimate purpose. It's not just a system for managing women, but a mechanism for producing the next generation of political leaders, cultural influencers, and institutional administrators. The children born here will either serve these functions directly or provide connections that strengthen relationships between powerful families and political factions. This realization transforms your understanding of your own role within the system. You're not just a prisoner who's achieved influence within your captivity. You're part of a multi-generational project designed to create cultural and political continuity through controlled reproduction and strategic child rearing. Your child will be shaped by institutional priorities from birth, educated according to political requirements, and assigned roles that serve compound purposes rather than individual preferences. But motherhood also creates motivations that transcend institutional constraints. The developing life within you represents possibilities that exist beyond the compound's walls, human potential that might someday challenge the system that created it, and a future that could be different from the past that shaped your own existence. Your child might grow up to transform or eliminate the structures that have defined your adult life. The most profound psychological shift involves recognizing that your child's welfare requires capabilities you haven't needed for your own survival. Protecting someone else from the compound's dehumanizing pressures requires different strategies than adapting to those pressures yourself. Creating opportunities for another person's growth and development within oppressive circumstances demands forms of resistance that individual survival doesn't require. You begin developing relationships with other mothers in the compound, women who've navigated pregnancy, childbirth, and child rearing within the system's constraints. Their experiences provide practical guidance about medical care, administrative procedures, and social dynamics that affect mothers and children. But they also provide emotional support for psychological challenges that can't be addressed through institutional resources. These relationships reveal a hidden network within the compound, women whose primary loyalties have shifted from institutional advancement to protecting and nurturing the next generation. This network operates according to different priorities than the advancement-focused hierarchies that dominate most compound social dynamics. Mothers share resources, information and support based on children's needs rather than competitive positioning for adult opportunities. But this maternal network also reflects the compound's success in channeling even parental love toward institutional purposes. The women who've learned to prioritize children's welfare over personal advancement are still operating within systems that reduce children to strategic assets rather than independent human beings deserving of freedom and self-determination. As your pregnancy progresses and you feel the child moving within you, you realize you're experiencing the compound's most profound moral complexity. The life you're creating will be loved, protected, and nurtured by someone who genuinely cares about its welfare. But that same life will be shaped by institutional priorities, assigned roles based on political calculations, and constrained by systems designed to prevent the kind of independent thinking and autonomous choice-making that define genuine humanity. Your child will grow up in a world more comfortable, more secure, and more intellectually stimulating than most children of your social class experience. But your child will also grow up without the possibility of choosing a different life, questioning the system's fundamental assumptions, or leaving the compound to discover what existence might be like under conditions of genuine freedom. The bargain you're making as a mother is the same bargain you made as a concubine, but with stakes that transcend your own survival. You're trading your child's freedom for security, independence for protection, and autonomous development for strategic advantages within an oppressive system. And as you place your hands on your growing belly and feel the movement of life that will soon depend entirely on your choices, you realize that the compound has achieved its ultimate victory. It's made you willing to sacrifice even your child's freedom for the promise of survival and advancement within captivity. Because the most effective prison isn't one that constrains your own choices. It's one that makes you grateful for the cage you're building around someone you love more than your own life. 15 years in the compound, and your 5-year-old son has just asked you a question that illuminates the impossible situation you've created. Mother, why can't I leave this place to visit the mountains? How do you explain captivity to someone who's never known freedom? How do you describe prison walls to someone who's never seen the world beyond them? How do you teach a child to survive within oppressive systems, while preserving their capacity to imagine something better? Your role as mother has evolved into your most complex administrative responsibility. You're not just raising a child, you're managing the development of a human being who represents significant political value to the compound, while potentially posing an existential threat to the system that created him. Every choice you make about his education, social development, and psychological formation has implications that extend far beyond typical parental concerns. The compound has assigned you to develop educational programming for all children born within the system, not just your own son, but the 12 other children whose existence creates similar management challenges for institutional leadership. You're responsible for designing curricula that prepare them for roles within the compound's broader political network, while ensuring they remain psychologically stable and institutionally loyal. But you're also responsible for preserving their humanity within a system designed to reduce people to strategic assets. The children need to learn skills that will make them valuable to the compound's political purposes, while retaining the capacity for independent thought and emotional development that makes them genuinely human rather than sophisticated automatons. The educational philosophy you develop reflects years of experience navigating the compound's moral contradictions. The children receive instruction in classical literature, music, political strategy, and cultural refinement that would impress educators in the most prestigious institutions. But they also receive training in psychological manipulation, social control, and institutional management that would horrify anyone committed to human dignity and autonomous development. Your son demonstrates remarkable intelligence and creativity that simultaneously delights you as a mother and terrifies you as someone who understands the compound's mechanisms. He asks questions that reveal genuine curiosity about the world beyond institutional boundaries. He creates art that expresses emotions the compound's social systems are designed to suppress. He forms relationships with other children based on mutual affection rather than strategic positioning. But he also displays capabilities that make him valuable to the compound's political purposes. He can read adult emotions with supernatural accuracy, adjust his behavior to create desired responses from powerful people, and navigate social hierarchies with instinctive understanding of how to maintain advantage without creating threats to established authority. He's developing into someone who could serve institutional purposes effectively while maintaining enough human connection to avoid complete psychological destruction. The other mothers observe your son's development with combinations of hope and concern that mirror your own conflicted feelings. He represents possibilities for their own children, evidence that compound-born individuals can retain humanity while acquiring capabilities necessary for survival and advancement within the system. But he also represents dangers they recognize too clearly, the possibility that exceptional children might disrupt the careful balances that keep everyone safe within institutional constraints. Your private discussions with the Lord about your son's education reveal the political calculations that shape every aspect of compound family life. The children aren't being raised as potential heirs to traditional political power, but as future administrators of institutions like the compound itself. They're being prepared for roles that require understanding both the operational requirements of oppressive systems and the psychological techniques necessary to maintain those systems without open rebellion. In essence, they are being groomed not to wield power flamboyantly, but to perpetuate it invisibly, subtly, and efficiently. You push back against aspects of this curriculum when you can, but every resistance must be disguised as refinement. You add art to their training in persuasion, music to their lessons in strategy, and poetry to the vocabulary of political manipulation. It's not rebellion, it's camouflage. But sometimes when your son looks at you with eyes too old for his age, you wonder if you're merely painting gold leaf over iron shackles. The most difficult lesson for both you and him is managing desire for freedom, for authenticity, for connection that isn't mediated by power. He dreams of mountains, rivers, open skies. He sketches birds in flight, always alone, and sometimes he cries in his sleep, whispering names of places he's never seen but somehow feels within his bones. You begin documenting these moments privately, not in the administrative reports, but in a secret journal you keep beneath the floorboards of your quarters. It's not evidence for resistance or leverage for blackmail, it's something much more dangerous: memory. Proof that these children, though born into cages, were human. The mother's network grows stronger, more intentional. You trade not just supplies or advice but strategies. How to teach a child the art of compliance without killing their capacity to dream. How to build internal strength when external strength would draw punishment. How to tell bedtime stories that are lullabies on the surface, but coded survival guides underneath. You don't teach your son to hate the compound. That would be cruel. Instead, you teach him to understand it, to see its mechanics clearly, to recognize the illusions it projects, to understand that power maintained through surveillance is always afraid of something freer than itself. You don't tell him to escape. You tell him to remember who he is, in case the opportunity ever arises. And when he asks, years later, "Mother, will I ever be allowed to choose?" you don't answer immediately. Instead, you reach for one of the stories you've saved for moments like this. A tale of a bird born in a cage, who sang such a beautiful song that the world beyond the walls remembered there was sky. You let him dream, and through him, you remember how to dream too. They weren't idle ornaments or pampered dolls, nor mere objects of the Lord's pleasure lounging in silken moonlight. Concubines were administrators, educators, political instruments and survival artists. They lived in a world that combined velvet and steel, where a smile could be a weapon, and a moment of rest was just another setting for surveillance. Their days were not filled with leisure, but with labor, emotional, psychological, intellectual. Every word spoken, every glance exchanged, every choice of dress or fragrance or silence was strategic. They raised children who weren't simply sons and daughters, but potential successors, pawns or threats, depending on who was watching. Behind the lacquered screens and perfumed robes were minds sharpening like blades. These women navigated systems older and more entrenched than any one regime's systems that saw them as property, and used their wombs to cement alliances. And still, they built networks of protection, resistance and knowledge. They nurtured life not only from their bodies, but from their intellect, their creativity, and their sheer will to survive. So what did concubines really do all day? They endured, they adapted, they outwitted. They preserved stories that would never be written in official scrolls. They raised futures within prisons and whispered freedom into lullabies. And in the quiet hours, behind closed doors, they reminded one another, and themselves, that even within walls built to contain them, the human spirit was always looking for a way out.